Hello, I'm Krista Campbell. Thank you for joining us today for Central New York's Water Authority leverages drone technology. Before we get started, I would like to encourage you to post your questions. As many of you probably know, we have time at the end of the webinar to answer some of the questions. If we get so many that we can't get to them on the webinar, we will post them on GeoNet as a Q&A document, so look for that. The webinar is being recorded. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email that includes a link to where you can find the recording. Okay, so let's talk about our webinar today. I would like to welcome Will Bianchini, Systems Analyst for Aqua, Central New York's Water Authority. Will is going to share how the UAS and GIS programs have streamlined operations, resulting in significant benefits to Aqua. He will also discuss how they got started and lessons learned. So he has a lot of information to share with you today. I hope you find it as interesting as I have. David Topman, our industry manager for water, is going to kick off the webinar. He's going to talk about drone technology and how it integrates with ESRI and ArcGIS and what that means to us. David?
All right, well, thanks, Krista. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started here. Wanted to talk about a little bit of kind of the current state of unmanned aerial systems, the use of drones in water, and of course we'll turn that all over to Will and what they're doing at Aqua. For those of you that may have joined us earlier in the summer, we had a webinar on drones as well. Down in Florida, and yet it's so some of this content may be a repeat, but we're finding ourselves actually changing the state of technology and UAS in general almost on a monthly basis. And actually will talk about some of the changes that they've even seen over the course of their implementation. So it seems like we could almost have a drone webinar every 3 months and still have new information to present. So from a current state with unmanned aerial systems, there's still that kind of that 25 kilogram differential that kind of distinguishes personal and commercial use, and those of us that may have hobby drones are definitely under that 55-pound limit. And I think that's what even many water utilities are getting into, just from a cost perspective, that they're kind of dipping their toe in the water, so to speak, with drones. And so it's kind of a much easier thing to get into. I mean, back in the day, we were all talking about the COA, and then of course the big thing was this section 333 exemption that allowed you to fly commercially, if you will. You still had to stay under that 400-foot ceiling, and of course you had to be greater than 5 miles, and I believe actually at one time it was 3 miles, and it's been expanded to 5. And then there's all sorts of ways to kind of understand where these no-fly zones are, and actually the FAA uses ESRI technology to show where the current no-fly zones are, and so it's very easy to kind of look up on a map where you're at, and if you're in one of the FAA no-fly zones. And of course, all that typically, you're in a line of sight whenever you're doing these missions, and now they've kind of added, what seems to be a big talk too is the Part 107 waivers, right? So as more and more utilities, more government entities are getting into things, I think they're trying to remove some of those barriers of entry by making certain things easier. When we started talking about the whole, unmanned aerial systems, some of my early training, we were very specifically told to talk about unmanned aerial vehicles because drones were bees, and so it was kind of droned into my head to talk about UAVs. But of course, drone seems to be the common vernacular, and ESRI ourselves, we responded with a product called Drone to Map. One of the nice things about Drone to Map, it's currently a desktop product, but it really works with any drone. It's kind of drone agnostic, and in the beginning, it really was about getting updated imagery, and you could, get very high resolution imagery for a particular site and push it up to ArcGIS Online, burn it into a new base map, and that would make it available for everyone to use, say like in Collector, and have very high resolution base maps. So, if you're working on a specific project, you could very easily get updated base map imagery. Well, what we're seeing more and more and more, though, and again, will talk about, it really has become a key software component for, basically performing remote data collection, but in a very safe environment. And again, will talk more about that, how it's kind of revolutionized how they're able to go visit their tanks. And so we're seeing it more and more in those inspections. But and of course, there's a lot more information that is being put out there. The FAA is continually updating their website, so I encourage you to always have that bookmarked and go understand the latest and greatest, especially with some of the current changes that are going on to again try to reduce the entry into using drone technology, and more websites, of course, are popping up with very good information. Here's the Drone Authority that is giving you kind of tips and tricks, if you will, and then also kind of this know before you fly, almost more for the hobbyists, and even we're seeing it a lot in agriculture, right? So a lot of farmers are getting out there and starting to use drones so they can keep track of their crops and their property. So again, lots of great sites that are popping up that give you lots of information on how to get into all things drones. And of course, we responded kind of with a drone to map for water utilities. And so at the end of the slide, we'll have a link here that talks about how what we're seeing in the water utilities, and actually talk to someone on the water team more about drone to map. That's for later. And we've just even released a new update to drone to map. Basically coming from our own product pages and the what's new. Of course, a lot of it was about improved performance, increased quality, actually some enhancements with ground control as far as seeing specific pictures. You can actually dial in that imagery, basically trying to do some adjustments with to get into the 3D products, and of course being able to share markups, right? So lots of attention on trying to improve performance and quality of the product. So that's an ongoing process there as well. So drones in water, kind of specifically, it's kind of interesting. So this is actually back in 2014, the Army Corps of Engineers was coming out with a drone article, and I remember getting a phone call involved with the American Society of Civil Engineers, so they were wanting to kind of some comments, and this was back in March of 2014. I was the public works guy back then, but it was really about what did we see it being used in engineering, and of course back then, even then, it was about basically surveying infrastructure, right? Being able to get to dam faces and things that would allow us to, where probably with all this aging infrastructure, the frequency of inspections was not as it was not as frequent as it could and should be, and drones are really helping us do that. And again, I think that's part of Will's presentation on how they're able to visit critical infrastructure on a more frequent basis. And so really, again, we kind of thought, oh, it's going to be great in all this imagery to update base maps, but we really are seeing it take off on this data collection and inspection. Of course, tall structures. So in the water industry, water tanks are a perfect asset to use with a drone to map. Of course, our telco folks and electric folks have their transmission towers and all their towers, but in water, again, water tanks, remote areas, we're finding more and more, our water resource folks are using drones to get out into the watersheds and get into areas in the middle of lakes that they couldn't really do from an aerial perspective, and again, all from a promoting safety. We're also finding that, from a project management perspective, this has been, our international friends have been using drones for many years when our FAA was still trying to figure out, how to manage this new technology. And it's always been for construction. Allows you to have incredible, timely photos of job site construction, right? So you just throw a drone up there and take pictures every day and compare and contrast, the project management on a daily basis. And of course, it gives you that high resolution photography as well. Allows you to kind of make sure everything's taken care of. And with our HD cameras, we're getting incredible, high resolution imagery, which we kind of thought that was very much in the beginning. So with that, I know Will's got lots of information to cover. It's a brilliant presentation. I think you'll learn a lot, and going to turn it over to Will. Will?
All right, thanks guys, and thanks for joining the session. My name is Will Bianchini, and I perform analyst duties here at Aqua. And in the past year since I started this role, it's encompassed anything from IT security to watershed management. And our organization started working with ESRI GIS products this time last year, so I get to lend a hand in that arena as well. I'd like to thank Andrew Weiss, the executive engineer here at Aqua, for his contributions to this presentation, as well as the rest of our team. And thanks to the staff at ESRI for giving me the opportunity to share our experience with folks who may also be interested in getting a handle on this technology. So what I'll be demonstrating today is how my organization got a UAS program up and running in a matter of weeks. Just a quick note, you'll hear me use the words drone and UAS interchangeably. UAS just stands for unmanned aircraft systems, and most folks in the industry probably prefer the term UAS, but out of habit I'll call it drone sometimes. And just to give you some premise, Aqua is roughly a medium-sized water utility. We have around 200 employees, so hopefully we can provide a basic relatable framework for other utilities to follow in setting up a similar program. And throughout this presentation, you'll also see very basic examples of how we've married our UAS program with ArcGIS Pro and Drone to Map, and they're both amazingly simple programs to use, and some of them are designed to handle UAS imagery. And quick disclaimer, I'm not trying to sell any specific technology or equipment. Just kind of showing you how we went about it and what worked for us. So, a common thought might be, well, we've never needed a drone before, why do we need one now? So I'll try to walk you through a checklist of items to take care of to get your program generating some value for your organization. And I'll show you some examples of what use cases our organization has taken advantage of thus far. And again, just try to give you an idea of how to tie this all into your GIS program. So at this point, I'll shed some light on Aqua and try to give you an idea of why we need to utilize creative approaches when it comes to managing our infrastructure. We serve about 500,000 people in 5 different counties, and we're also the backup supply to the city of Syracuse, which is a major city here in New York. Here's a map of our system. It's about 45 miles long, north and south as the crows fly, and additionally, same thing for east and west, about 45 miles. And the stars you see on the map there represent where we draw our water from, so we're pretty distributed here. It's actually cheaper for us to pull water from the southern portions of our infrastructure due to gravity, but Lake Ontario to the north is an extremely vast source, so we're lucky to have that. And we also have some emergency connections to neighboring lakes, which is a bonus in drier conditions here. I'm sure most of you are aware our climate we experience in central New York is pretty dramatic. Our winters have months of below freezing temperatures, and we have wild temperature swings too. And you can imagine that kind of weather wreaks havoc on our infrastructure. So you have freeze and thaw effects, and that places extreme stress on our infrastructure and the water mains in particular. And the summers are pretty nice here, but we do get a fair amount of precipitation and many intense storms. So we got a lot of temperature swings. This is a picture of a couple of years ago of a storm we got. This probably happens every year, so you can imagine working in this. And then here's a picture of one guy's office. So you can see you kind of got to be a character to work in this environment, or builds character. I'm not sure which one comes first. So just to wrap up our overview, we deliver about 40 million gallons of water a day to commercial and residential customers, and serve about 500,000 people. So if you laid our main straight, they would extend from New York City to Las Vegas, or alternatively New York City to Miami, Florida, and back again, which sounds pretty nice this time of year. So Aqua has continually been expanding our authority. We've been through decades of bids and construction, dozens of system takeovers and consolidations, and all of which has forced us to service and maintain a huge range of tanks and facilities. And each tank really has its own personality and resides in its own little microclimate, sometimes nice, sometimes mean. So it kind of goes without saying that keeping tabs on these things is extremely important for public health and just the well-being of our community. When you have 58 storage facilities and 58 unique designs, there has never been a one-size-fits-all approach to performing observations or inspections. So the hard part sometimes is sitting down and figuring out what you're actually trying to accomplish, and then thinking about the lengths you're going to gather data. At some point, it's important to sit down and assess, what do we want, and why are we doing stuff, and what are we doing, and is that all in alignment? So in a sense, this is kind of the why. Why might we need better tools to ensure a resilient water distribution? We have dozens of tanks that get battered by the elements. We have thousands of acres of surface water to monitor, and constant construction planning, and there's all kinds of stuff going on here. So really, the question we ask every day is, how can we save money, and how can we save time, and how do we enhance the resiliency of our water system? So now that we seem to think there could be a better way to manage our assets, it's good to assess your options and try to justify a new approach. So when it comes to tank observations, professional tank inspection can run well over 10 grand. And renting a propeller plane for the day could be over $500 an hour in our area. And while the cost of a drone is somewhere in the $2 grand range, you can imagine these things can pay themselves off pretty quickly. So in our use case, the U.S. probably paid for itself in a day, all while giving us full control of our own schedule. We no longer have to wait for budgets or bids or be constrained by chartered airtime. So that's a huge bonus for us. So in the first month of operating our drone program, we don't need planes anymore. We don't need to bring out scaffolding. We have fairly quick turnaround times and can position ourselves in unique and specific viewpoints with regards to our assets. So right away, we obtained updated pictures for our website, for our boardroom. We got pictures of newly painted tanks and pictures of tanks about to be serviced. And we really enhanced our ability to coordinate projects with other entities. I'm sure most of you do some project management work and can relate to how complicated things can get pretty quickly. So getting everyone on the same page by using some photography is always a bonus. And on a side note here, we were able to add this drone program to our insurance policy. I think it was a $1 million policy for next to nothing. So I believe that's so much cheaper than setting a contractor up or an employee up a 350-foot tank to get a look at something. So the first step to get your program up and running is learning the material, and don't take this part lightly, especially if you've not taken a test in a while. The goal here is to get a FAA Part 107 remote pilot certificate, and that involves taking the remote pilot knowledge test. So that does cost some money. You might have to travel to an approved testing center. I know I had to drive about an hour and a half away to find a place, and there is a minimum passing score. There's courses available online to assist you through this material. I personally know a few people that have been successful with these courses. They cost about $100, and they probably spend 2 months studying the material in their spare time. Personally, I put in about 30 hours of study time, and I just use the FAA study guide they issue from their website and doing a lot of supplemental research using Google. And I made test arrangements on a Monday and took the test 3 days later on a Thursday. So it is possible to cram. I wouldn't recommend it. When I made the call to book the test, the proctor kind of laughed at me and said there's no way I'd pass, and that's a waste of money. Somehow I squeaked by to both of our surprises, thankfully. But I actually went back and had to study more material to shore up on some of the regulatory topics, because honestly, no one likes paying fines, and we don't want to deal with law enforcement. So we want to make sure that we're within the law, especially since it's changing so often. So when it comes to the test, expect a lot of maps, airspace questions, know your symbology, know your terms, and definitely allow yourself some time to get comfortable with the material there. So when it comes to equipment, we just decided to go with the DJI Phantom 4. It's pretty cost effective, it's easy to use. There's a ton of information available online. And that's really a big bonus there. There's YouTube clips everywhere. There's tons of forums devoted to individual units that they make. And there's a wider range of aftermarket products available, such as lenses. We picked up a set of neutral density lenses, which are great when capturing imagery over water, cuts down on glare and stuff like that. There are drawbacks to the system though. The firmware upgrades can be kind of a pain. Some functionality breaks, some is enhanced. So you got to be careful with that and do your research. And also, as of late, there are major security concerns with these products. They are manufactured in China. The Army banned these products. Some people think that DJI is sending data back to their servers in China and that we are being spied on with their infrastructure. Whether that's true or not, that's one thing to be aware of. So if you're in a high security area, maybe you wouldn't want to use this product, but it all depends what works for you. So in terms of training, watching YouTube videos, again, was probably the biggest thing for me. Some of the videos get pretty goofy, but there is a ton of information you can extract from them, whether it's camera settings or video settings. There's all kinds of advice on flight planning and just different kinds of tips. So that stuff's pretty invaluable. And then just go out into a field and fly around in a circle, fly around an object and test out your automated flight settings, test out your obstacle avoidance, and kind of put yourself in situations where you might be alerted and figure out how to react. And that stuff's pretty invaluable in a field or in a real life setting, because flying your tanks and you have SCADA equipment on top, you might have cell phone equipment on top, the interference can get pretty real, and you're gonna have to know how to react. So put yourself in those stressful situations before you go out into a practical role here. And again, the regulations, they're changing a lot. There's all kinds of waivers and rules of the FAA you have to get now, and it all takes time. So do your planning. And it's all becoming more and more important with each passing month to try to figure this out. And so right now, the most important thing in this time is just to register your drone when you get it, and make sure you have the contact to air traffic control in the area you're flying. So if anything's happening, just let them know. If you have a flyaway, you gotta let them know. It's good to be transparent with these people. And the best place to stay informed and all this information is the FAA website. And they're in the process now of issuing maps to help remote pilots fly safely. And again, you can find all that information on their website. So now I'll start talking about some of our use cases. So our tanks can be over 350 feet tall. The one in the picture is, a ground tank, so it's not that big. But these can be difficult to access due to the location. There's always labor constraints. Employees need to have specific training to even climb a ladder, whether it be inside or outside of the tank. So finding an employee willing to climb to the top of a tall tank can get pretty difficult, especially with an aging workforce, cold climates, or just hazardous weather in general. And obtaining exterior pictures of a water tank historically has been expensive and not very timely. So, when you have professionals go out there, it's really expensive. They're usually the ones getting us detailed images of our tanks, and that happens about every 10 years or so for our tanks. And in this climate here, waiting 10 years for pictures and inspections, you never know what's going to happen. So it's good to be able to get up and get out there more often. So that's very important. And even getting a cherry picker on site to look at stuff, that's pretty difficult too. Not every site is set up to have the ability to get on top and look at everything readily. So nowadays we employ a drone to quickly and safely take aerial photos of the asset. They're highly maneuverable. You can capture a wide range of angles at varying heights and distances from the asset. The 4K camera on our drone used, you can capture these assets in extreme detail, and you can really zoom in and highlight parts of the tank and look what's going on. And even the largest tanks in our distribution system can be completely photo captured in under 20 minutes. And that's with over 100 high definition images, and that's capturing pretty much every square inch of that asset. And this is a screenshot of drone to map, and each one of those green triangles there is an individual photo. So you can fly circles around the tank using your automated settings with your applications, and in drone to map, you can really just scroll through and see every square inch. So that's pretty invaluable. You can also see an example of a before and after shot of a tank we rehabbed this summer. For example, you can show the board of directors these images to kind of explain and show them why these jobs require such significant capital. And previously these shots were impossible to get. So to be able to really show that to the people in charge really brings it all home for all of us here. So for any of you that have used Art Collector, it's a great application. We use it for an array of applications here. I was able to make this collector application to record inspection records of a tank. And collector allows for pictures, so I can snap a shot of a tank, have it cached locally on my phone, and then add the picture to the application and to an inspection record. So if you see something, you can snap a photo of it and attach it to a record, and you can really manage your assets in a way you haven't been able to done before. So this is great too. We use this for hydrant inspections and watershed management too. So I highly recommend Art Collector. Another use case is for surface water quality observations. It's obviously extremely important for us to monitor our resources. Historically, we've only been able to see from shore or from a boat what's really going on out there. And these options definitely are not the most ideal, since they're very time consuming, and you don't really have a lot of room to move around, especially with property rights and trespassing and that kind of thing. So it's really tough to monitor trends in the lake vegetation from a low angle. And then you add that to invasive species, or if you have algae blooms, there's not much you can do from the traditional approaches. So we started deploying our drone out there, and I can send that thing, half a mile in each direction and still keep it in sight and cover a lot of ground within one battery. So that's amazing. So we can reach hard to reach areas or inaccessible parts of the lake that are susceptible to algae blooms. So if we do discover something, we can alert the Board of Health. Thank God we haven't had any issues, but neighboring water companies have. And we've been able to get out there and help the water quality managers assess risk and assess the distribution of some of their problems. And additionally, this imagery can be laid into maps, and these maps can show pop-up visualizations, which can help us really understand the movement of blooms. And in general, really, the spatial element of imagery is very, very powerful. So here's kind of an example of that. Using Arc Pro, you can map out your images and kind of compare them to see what's going on. And so from one month to another, you can kind of see the difference in some of the growth in vegetation. So the one on the left is from September and the right is October. So you can really get an idea of what the baseline lake should look like in terms of the water quality. So that goes a long way. So we can keep track of locations now and dates, and it's great stuff. And for project planning too is another use case. So we have site photos from various aerial perspectives, and it allows our project planners and engineers to review the entire project area to assess site risks and plan proper mitigations. In this example, we can coordinate with cell phone companies who house their infrastructure and our assets, and we can kind of divide up the work and get on the same page, especially when we're doing a rehab and we're trying to keep uptime for these people. That goes a long way. And if you look to the SECT images to the right, you will notice an ortho image and a DEM model below it. So this site is an engineered wetland, and this wasn't retaining as much water as it was designed for. So with the help of this imagery, we were able to see the locations of our drainage systems. And by looking at the DEM model, we could assess the contours of the site and really get a good idea of maybe why the system's not behaving as designed. So even with waist-high vegetation, the drone map was able to render a pretty good DEM model. And ultimately, we ended up capping a portion of the outflow in certain sections in order to maintain the desired water level. So that stuff's pretty powerful. And you can create the stuff within 20 minutes of flying and about an hour of processing. So you can get a pretty quick turnaround on this, and it's all just click and play. You don't have to know too much about really what you're doing, especially for you fellow novice GIS users out there. And here's some examples of some drone to map. So this is a 3D textured mesh that I created from from some drone imagery. And models like this can be powerful when planning work. There's an interactive component to this, so you can zoom around and get a good lay of the land. And it's common to have contractors from out of state working with us, so being able to share photography or even 3D modeling of our assets could prove to be extremely helpful going forward. And you can actually export these 3D models to PDFs, which you can send around, and outside entities can zoom around and play with the stuff and look at different angles. So we're all on the same page before we even visit the site. So that is huge. And the final example here I'll show you is an orthomosaic produced in DroneMap. And here I automated a flyover with an app called Map Pilot. So the orange line is the path the drone took, and the blue dots are locations of the pictures taken. So the ortho itself is extremely detailed, and you can see a portion of the roof I zoomed into on the right, and even from 200 feet above the building, we were able to notice anomalies on the roof. So in this case, we found 7 instances where some drain plugs had become sheared off, and this location of this building is in Oswego, New York, which gets about 140 inches of snow a year. So to have the ability to get up there and get this kind of imagery and act on it, who knows how much money this could save us by noticing stuff like this. So with that, that's really the end of it here. So Krista.
Thanks, Will. Very good presentation. We did have a couple questions come in. So I'm just going to start with one that I thought was interesting. You mentioned during your discussion about the actual drone that you picked that there are a lot of accessories, and I think you said something about a camera lens or a filter. Can you talk about that? And have you used different lenses or filters, and have a certain kind been more valuable than others?
Sure. So we went with a neutral density lens. It came with 3 of them. I think they're rated 8, 16, and 32, and each of those is practical for different light conditions. And really, what this is valuable is for over open water, when you have glare and you're trying to look at aquatic vegetation or spot algae movements. Those filters are able to kind of cut through the light, and they're also polarized too. And we found that to be a huge benefit when monitoring our source water. So again, that's a neutral density lens, and you can find those on Amazon, and they're fairly reasonable to buy. And they screw right onto our DJI Phantom 4 model. So again, that's one of the bonuses of having DJI. There's just a ton of extra products for those things that are kind of third party.
Cool. It sounds like you're doing a lot of stuff. So we have some other questions concerning the use of control points. Are you using very many, or how does that work as far as getting your imagery using DroneMap?
So we have not experimented too much with control points. That's on the list for this spring. So I can't comment too much on that, but I know for DroneMap, those can be really powerful for ensuring repeatability of your flights and being able to tie in, and you can get more engineered results or closer to a significant level of accuracy for actually making construction decisions. And we will be getting to that point yet, so I don't have much to share on that.
Okay, another question, which I have no idea what this means, but you might. Did you get a COA? And if so, how long and what was involved?
A COA. We did not get a COA. The only thing we have applied for in terms of regulations is a waiver to fly in Class C airspace, since we have some tanks in Class C airspace, and they say that takes up to 90 days, and I believe it. Just kind of understanding the bureaucracy of the FAA. They're doing the best they can. They're overwhelmed, but COA I have not dealt with.
So Dave here. A COA, basically a certificate of authorization, the COAs. I mean, that was all the rage and all the conversation probably about 1 to 2 years ago. That you weren't, when drones were first kind of starting to take off, and the FAA kind of really clamped down and said no one's doing drones in the United States of America, even though internationally it was taking off. They did release their COAs, and that was up to an 18-month process to get your COA. And it was really only emergency response personnel, police, some utilities were starting to get them, but it was a very onerous task to get your COA. But like you say, as you mentioned, the regs are changing frequently, and I believe the government's trying to, make our lives a bit easier, and that's when they went into that Title 333, and then even that was then for more corporation type activities that were a very controlled environment, and now you get your Part 107, and more folks can be skilled and get their license and actually start putting drones up in that Class G, basically the hobby airspace. So I think COs are still there, but again, it's I think more the route that you took, getting your license and able to apply for your organization.
Thanks, David. Will, we have another question specifically about the certification you mentioned that you tested for. The audience would like to know, does this require a renewal? Are you going to have to continue your education and get CEUs or a path like that?
So if they're asking about the actual FAA Part 107 license, that's expires every 2 years. So you got to study up and get a hold of the new regulations. If they're talking about the waiver process to fly in certain airspace, those are good from anywhere from a day flight up to 2 years. So there's a waiver process, and there's one other process, so it depends on the time frame. And they do expire within a set amount of time. And that's really because the regulations are changing almost by the month.
That makes sense. So during your presentation, you showed some imagery that your drone had captured, and it looked pretty good to me, but the audience is asking about the resolution and if it's high enough that you would use it as a base map, or it could be used to collect aerial imagery to be used as base maps.
So I don't see why you couldn't use this imagery as a base map. So even some of the smaller orthos I take of maybe an acre plot, they end up being about 2 gigabytes worth of data behind there. In terms of the resolution number, I don't have that off the top of my head, but I could see myself or our organization stitching together some ortho mosaics and then using them. Absolutely.
Thanks, Will. We still have questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going. One of the attendees wanted to know about planning your path. What software do you use for that? Is it something different, and was that difficult to learn and use?
Right. So one of the most powerful things we found was when we're doing tank inspections with DJI, with their native application that they author, there is this feature called point of interest. So we're able to fly directly above the asset you want to capture, and make that as your X point. And then from there, you can fly the drone to the position, to a radius away from that position, and set that. So let's say 30 feet from the center of a tank, and then you can set the the altitude and the speed. So from there, it'll fly a perfect circle around that center point that you created, and it uses GPS to to really do that. For some of our orthographic images and creating DEMs, I use this app called Map Pilot. And there you can kind of draw a border around the asset you want to capture, and it'll automatically kind of figure out the best path to fly over that, the correct amount of passes, and ensure there's enough overlap for your your data processing. And you can control the speed of that, and it will adjust for light levels, so it's pretty good. So I'm not the most savvy when it comes with programming the stuff, but these applications kind of make you feel smarter than you really are, I'll be honest. So DJI Go app and Map Pilot are what I really rely on when I'm out there.
Thanks, Will. You mentioned data, and the audience is asking, with all these images and pictures that you're taking, has data storage or data management been a problem? How do you do that?
So it has. Thankfully, I work in IT, so I can make room on the servers when we need it. But this is pretty large, so we'll get out there and get 100 images of a tank. Do we need all that? Probably not. Do I like having it? Yes, and it's great to put it all into Drone and Map. Going forward, if this program expands, if we keep doing this, we'll be looking at maybe cloud hosting or getting an external hard drive. If it's critical infrastructure, we'll keep it in-house probably. So that's important to think about. But storage is relatively cheap now, so that is not one of our concerns at the moment.
Thanks, Will. So you talked about an insurance policy for your drone. Is that separate from your other insurance policy? Is it specifically for the drone, or did you add it to an existing policy?
So we were able to add $1 million policy to our existing insurance. So we have backhoes and front loaders and all kinds of equipment here. So we were able to tack the the drone on. We just called the company, tacked it on, and it cost us pretty much next to nothing, according to our insurance person. And even in the private world, I was able to get a quick insurance policy. I think through my homeowner's insurance. But yeah, I was able to get one just for one flight. So it's pretty easy to get. Most insurance companies have dealt with it by now. So if you call them up, they should have an answer for you if they're worth it.
Great, thanks. The next question is, how long does your drone stay in the air? So when you have a project and you're inspecting these tanks, do you have to recharge it? You mentioned doing it in one run about 20 minutes. Is that about the maximum time for your drone to be up?
Sure. So I have, so each battery I have for my unit will go about 20 to 25 minutes, depending on the wind speed. So we're always going to be fighting a little bit of a breeze. So obviously the higher the wind is, the less battery life you have. And as well as temperature, if it's cold, your battery doesn't last as long. But say I get about 20 minutes out there, and with kind of the workflow I developed, we're able to get a tank with one battery. I do have 3 batteries, so I can change them in and out. And with Map Pilot, you're able to start a flight and go on a path, and if you run out of battery, it'll fly back to you automatically. You can change your battery out, and you can continue your flight, so it'll fly back to where it left off and start capturing more imagery. So again, those apps make it really easy for the lay users, such as us utility folk. So that's great.
So Will, Dave here again. I was kind of you showed screenshots of drone to map, but also using ArcGIS Pro. So are you guys, are you specifically also an I guess an Arc map shop for much of your GIS? I'm just kind of curious about the use of, doing a lot in Pro, and that's the one thing we're trying to get folks out there to understand, that Pro is very much part of the platform, and they can use it right alongside their Arc map as well. But Pro is really finely tuned for high performance and doing the 2D 3D imagery, and you seem to kind of pop in and out of Pro just fine. And so any comments about that whole environment? Sure.
Well, it is 64-bit, so it works a lot faster. And it also integrates with drone to maps. You can push stuff from drone to map into Arc Pro. And I've actually been using it for a lot of things. I find it pretty easy to pick up. Before I started this job a year ago, I hadn't used a GIS platform in quite some time. And so I went into Arc Map, and then I also downloaded Arc Pro and started using both kind of interchangeably, finding out workflows that were easier for me in one or the other. And within the past year, I've pretty much switched completely over to Arc Pro. And there's just a lot of information out there on it now, and in forums and on ESRI's site. So when I run into something, I'm able to find the answer pretty quickly. And in terms of storing imagery in here and having 3D scenes, it's just amazing how fast it is. And it is kind of the performance is a lot more modernized compared to Arc Map, even though that has some benefits too. I think it's definitely worth a look and worth getting into, and it's really where it seems like everything's going to go to that platform. So it's good to get in there and learn it now.
Well, yeah, and and so yeah, great. I mean, that's exactly what we like to hear, and that's what we're trying to get folks to, to understand that, there's still quite a, our traditional editing environment with geometric network, folks are in ArcMap, but there's no reason they can't fire up ArcGIS Pro today and use it alongside, because a lot of data will move in and out. But for those that are getting into drone to map and the imagery piece, yeah, it becomes the preferred product because of performance and ease of use. So glad to hear that's working for you.
Thanks, David. Will, we still have a few more questions if you can spare a few more minutes.
Absolutely.
So how about the proximity of you or the pilot and the drone? What's the distance that you need to stay within between you and the drone?
So according to FAA's regulations, you have to maintain a visual line of sight to the drone, which essentially means if you can see it, then you can fly it. There is limitations to your range with your drone. I know there's some ways to extend your range. I mean, I guess it technically, if you have binoculars out, you can still see the drone. Is that within the regulations? I don't know. It might be. So actually, I always wear my glasses when I go flying so I can see a little further. So yeah, as long as you keep it below 400 feet and it's within line of sight, I've gone over a half a mile over the lake to try to go over our intakes or to go along the shore to places I can't really get to. So
Wow, that's amazing.
yeah, and I've heard
So
of people going up to a mile, but I wouldn't recommend
wow.
that because I'd be afraid of it flying away.
Does the drone itself, the product, does it list a certain distance, or it's not specified?
I'm sure it
Or do you know?
does, and those what the numbers they list are usually a little bit conservative because they're trying to cover
Right.
themselves as well. But if you go on forums, you'll find pretty quickly people test this. I've heard of people going over a mile away, and then I've seen pictures of people pretty much up at at an altitude way above where you should be safely.
Uh-oh.
So people do test these out with success. I would never recommend it, but it's possible with our DJI unit at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
David has something else.
Well, and this is where, if you have some specific questions, we have quite a few partners that are also in this space, and we know from beyond water utilities, a lot of our emergency response folks are using drones in emergency situations for flooding, internationally, earthquake recovery, those sorts of things, and of course even military use. And so there are obviously, that the drone space that's in the over 55-pound weight limit, and we get into the fixed wing drones, and even our folks that are doing military drones. We're starting to see more kind of consumer commercial applications of even drone activity on the predators and things of that nature are moving into kind of the commercial space, because some of our utilities that have 7,000 miles of transmission lines, they can't do that with a 25-minute lithium battery. So they're turning to the much larger fixed wing drones and still using the same technology to do all the image processing. So again, if you have questions for kind of extreme needs, long distances, ESRI's involved with all sorts of different drone companies that take you beyond kind of that hobby level airspace. So just thought I'd add that.
Thanks, David. We're going to take one more question. Will, you showed a DEM and you talked about it a little bit in the presentation. Several of the attendees have questions around that. Did you have to collect different types of data, and how did you take that and create the DEM?
So the picture above the DEM was just an orthomosaic of the site area. So in Drone to Map, you can run 2D products, and you can check off different boxes of the outputs you want. So one of them being, a digital terrain model or digital elevation model, orthomosaics. There's a bunch of different options. So it's literally you put the same imagery in to Drone to Map that you would take to do an orthomosaic, and you just check a couple extra boxes and allow maybe an extra hour of processing time if you're really doing a full process, and it spits it right out. So it's really as easy as that. And some of these products make me look maybe a little smarter than I am when it comes to GIS, but it's just so easy to use. That's all it comes down to, is just clicking a couple boxes and running it.
Well, and that's I guess one of the most powerful features of Drone to Map. We kind of, again, early envisioned, it was the imagery piece, but what we're finding, because basically every photo and hundreds of photos have different oblique angles and are all geo-referenced. The beauty of Drone to Map is I can create these 3D frameworks, these 3D wireframes, and save them as ESRI compliant data objects, right? So as you're mentioning, there's different checkboxes, and it really just becomes in processing time, right? So you can go after that very quick, easy, high precision photography, but it can do so much more, right? It can actually take you into that 3D space and build very useful data sets. Like you said, when in our rehearsal, when you were talking about the wetlands, it was a brilliant use case. It's like, you wanted the wetlands, you wanted water retention, you weren't getting it, and very quickly through the DEM, you're able to find kind of that drainage spot where it was leaking and plug the hole, so to speak, and get your wetland back as per design. So yeah, there's a lot of the very useful data products that are taking us into 3D, very useful 3D, and very quickly, just with a checkbox or two in Drone to Map.
Thanks, David. Well, for those of you still on the webinar, will be presenting at our ESRI Water Conference coming up at the end of January. So if you are coming or planning to come, you're not sure yet, just keep in mind that Will be there. You can meet him in person. You can ask some questions. He's going to present again about their drone case studies and give an update on how they've been doing and what projects they're working on. So thank you, Will, for the webinar, and thank you for presenting ahead of time at the Water Conference. I hope everyone enjoyed today's presentation, and hopefully we'll see you in January for our next webinar.